Hi everybody, TJ Mac Vintage Cards here, and I'm excited to do this video today where I'm going to talk more about a couple cards that I picked up that have connections to the family, and also cards that really just go nicely together with other cards in my collection. And this first card I'm going to show in a few minutes is from this scrapbook that my wife's uncle received from his grandparents on Easter in 1952. And I've shown this before with some of the Yankees Bowman pitching cards that I have from the early 1950s. And in the scrapbook, there's various sports page articles from the time that show different Yankees predominantly. There's some programs in there as well that are not affixed to the pages, but rather inserted into the book. And then, as you'll see on this first page, there's also some postcards that he would get back in the day through the mail with my wife's father. They'd send these out and get these signed or sent back. And here you got Sal Magley and then Ted Williams. I don't think that's his real signature from the day because I've seen other postcards that look similar to that. But it's still a nice keepsake. And then I have this Lou Boudreau, which was sent out as well. And this depicts him on the Red Sox, which he did play with the Red Sox from 51 and 52. And he also managed the Red Sox during that time as well. But I wanted to add another card to my collection. I don't have any Lou Boudreau cards, so I thought it would be really nice to add to the collection one from his playing days. So I selected this 1949 Bowman, which is really just a beautiful card. It's got very nice coloring on it, and I really went with this one over the Leaf because I wanted to have the red background, and I wanted to get one with a nice red background, so it really brings out the Indians on his uniform and the C on his cap, as well as the brim of his hat there. And just, I think, shows well. And Boudreau was one of the better players in baseball at that time, coming off a season in 1948 that was the fourth best single season wins above replacement for a shortstop in Major League Baseball history. He had a 10.4 WAR, and that's also 38th best all-time among position players, and that would be non-pitchers. And WAR is basically, again, wins above replacement, and it means he added over 10 wins versus another replacement-type player that would be like a borderline starter in the or borderline roster player in baseball. And in 1942, some of you may know this, but at 24 years old, Boudreau was chosen to be player manager of the Cleveland Indians. And I did know that, but I've never really given it a lot of thought to how difficult that must have been for him. He struggled as a manager, connecting with some of the veteran players who opposed what they saw as a young kid leading the team. And that was probably made a lot of players uneasy because wisdom was very much respected at that time or any time, obviously. And a lot of times that's attributed to age, accurately or not accurately, but it's just the way it is. And Boudreau would say during some conferences on the mound, veteran pitchers would give him a hard time, saying things like, listen, college boy, you play shortstop and I'll do the pitching. And then especially troublesome was a pitcher named Jim Bagby Jr., who Boudreau considered the nastiest pitcher who he ever played behind. And when Boudreau would boot a ball, he would hear razzing about going back to college and to learn how to play shortstop from him, as well as some expletives that would fly sometimes. And Boudreau stuck with it, though, and I have a lot of respect for him for that. And he reached that pinnacle of success in 1948, where I think he had one of the greatest seasons in baseball history when you factor in that he was an MVP that year as a player, hitting .355 with 18 home runs and 106 RBIs. He was also manager of the team, and the team went on to win the World Series over the Boston Braves in 6 games. So when you put all those things together, that's got to be one of the best seasons ever in Major League history when you consider what he accomplished. And he stayed with the Indians, as I mentioned, until 1950 before moving on to the Red Sox. But just a guy that I really have a lot of respect for, and he was somebody that my father-in-law especially really liked growing up as a kid, being an Indians fan. Al Rosen was his favorite player, and he, of course, liked Feller, but Boudreau was another one that he really enjoyed. So I'm real happy to have this card in my collection, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to set it up with some other cards. So I've shown this Bob Feller a few times in the past, one of my favorite cards for sure in my collection, and I showed this Larry Doby once a long time ago. And these are two really my most prominent Indian cards in my collection. And it's nice to add this Lou Boudreau as well. And then I don't think I showed the back, so I'll show that. There you can see it. Just a really nice, clean, nice-looking card. One that, again, I'm real excited to add because I just think it's a nice fit with those other two Indians next to him. And Larry Doby has a nice connection to Boudreau as well because, of course, he would have been the manager when Doby became the second black player to play in the major leagues after Jackie Robinson. And he was introduced by Boudreau to the players in the clubhouse, and some weren't as friendly to him as many of the others were on the team. But I gave Boudreau a lot of credit for going around and personally introducing him to each of the players. So it really shows that he wanted to make that work for the team and give Doby a chance to succeed in the major leagues. So just three great-looking cards here. So here we have a 1961 Sport magazine that came from my father-in-law's magazine collection. And this is a very fitting magazine to have. My father-in-law was a big Calaveto fan, more so on the Indians than on the Tigers because he was an Indians fan. And also my father was a Calaveto fan. That was really his second favorite player after Mickey Mantle. And that came from my grandfather taking him in the early 60s to see the Tigers play. So he really became enamored with Al Kaline and mainly Rocky Calaveto. And Terry Pluto, who was a sports writer with the Akron Beacon Journal, said of Calaveto, he was everything a ball player should be. He was a tremendous right-handed slugger who put his power on full display on June 10th, 1959, with the Indians when he hit 4 home runs in consecutive at-bats against the Baltimore Orioles at the Cavernous Memorial Stadium. Now, he's only one of 6 players to hit 4 home runs in consecutive at-bats in a single game. Really, just a fantastic player of that time. Every bit a good hitter he was the same as an outfielder. He played right field. He had a rocket for an arm. His arm was certainly in the class of Clemente and Carl Furillo. A few runners would try to stretch extra bases on him by going to third base, certainly, when the ball went into Rocky's hands because he just had that kind of arm. He was also a great glove man in the field. In 1965, he played every game in the outfield, and he had an errorless season. He had a perfect 1.0 fielding percentage. That was the first time that ever happened in American League history. Now, he played 14 seasons from 55 to 68, mostly with the Tigers and Indians, but he also played with the Athletics, White Sox, Dodgers, and Yankees. He was just a .266 hitter, but he really would have done well in this era of advanced statistics because he had a real high on-base percentage and, of course, slugging percentage as well, being a power hitter. He had 374 home runs in his career, 1,159 RBIs, and was a 9-time All-Star. And he was just the 5th player in American League history to have 11 consecutive 20 home run seasons. So I'm really excited to add this card right here, this 1961 Rocky Calaveto. And you can just see here on the back, flip it this way. This is a guy that just had some fantastic seasons in the 1960s and in the 50s as well, late 50s. And this was one I've been wanting to add because, as you saw in a couple videos ago, and I'll show the cards in a second, I had the Al Kaline and Norm Cash, and I talked about getting the Calaveto. It's just a really nice connection to that 61 team, but also to my father as well, and even my father-in-law. So nice to have this magazine and card together. So now I'm going to slot this card in right here. So there it is. And these 3 players here all 3 of them had in the top 5 of wins above replacement in 1961. And the Tigers, as I mentioned in the video when I showed the Cash and Kane line, were a fabulous team that year. And if it wasn't for those New York Yankees that had Mantle, Maris, and Whitey Ford winning the Cy Young, the Tigers might have won the World Series that year. Their team was that good. And it's just really nice to capture these 3 players together, and just a nice historical look at these players because of the seasons they had, but also that nostalgia because of the family connection. Now, just to further add to this, speaking of these connections with our family, my oldest son is a big Dallas Cowboys fan, just like I was growing up, and I've talked about that a while ago, I think last year when I had done a video. But my favorite player at quarterback growing up was Danny White. I was a Tony Dorsett fan as well, but I was a huge Danny White fan. I remember Staubach vaguely, but White was really the quarterback of the Cowboys teams I remember most. And I just had a lot of appreciation for him. He was a punter and a quarterback, as you can see on here. And he punted for the Cowboys in the late 70s when Staubach was a starting quarterback. And then he became the starting quarterback after Staubach retired and was also the team punter as well. And I got to see him play in November of 1984 against the Buffalo Bills. That year, the Cowboys were 7-4 going into the game, and the Bills were 0-11. And the Cowboys lost to them. It was probably the biggest upset of the season, and certainly one of the biggest upsets in Dallas Cowboys history. And the second play from scrimmage, I believe it was, Greg Bell, the running back for the Bills, broke a touchdown for over 80 yards. I think it was like 85 yards. Finished with over 200 yards rushing that day. And Danny White didn't even start at quarterback at that time. It was Gary Hogeboom, but White was the punter. So I got to at least see him punt that day. And it was my first time ever seeing the Cowboys play, and just a really nice memory for me. And then years later, I took my son to see the Cowboys play as well. Dak wasn't the quarterback at the time. It was before he was drafted. But it was just a nice father-son type thing when you get to do that and relive memories of your youth as well. So that's my son's guy now is Dak Prescott. And just like my guy was Danny White. So it's nice to have these two side by side. And just really is one of the key things about card collecting for me is those types of connections. And, the slab cards, I've talked about this. I know, people collect different things. I'm just a slab person because I just like to have only so many cards in my collection, and I really like to have that ability to be able to, have my family do what they need to do with those cards if I'm no longer here. And that's very important to me. And I'm just hoping that, if they can keep the cards, that's great when I'm no longer here. If they can't, then they can do what they need to do with them. And I just don't want to leave my family ever with that burden. But I also want to leave my family with something that's, nice and memorable that I can give them, to have just these special memories for me and these special connections. And that's just the way I do it. It's just the way I've worked as a collector for over 20 years. And I'm just real proud of, having these types of cards that have these types of connections. So here are four of the Cowboys rookie quarterbacks that I've had in my collection. Four certainly of the most prominent in Dallas Cowboys history. And the Don Meredith 1960 Flair, 72 Roger Staubach, 89 Topps Troy Aikman, and then this is a 2003 Bowman Chrome Tony Romo. So now I want to add to that Danny White, one of those, again, special quarterbacks from my childhood, and then Dak Prescott, who my son likes. So now I have these quarterbacks all together and just have a really nice bond there with my son over these cards. So that's all I got today. Thanks for joining me, and I hope everybody has a great weekend.